Eileen, and Emily. I'm going to please invite them up and let them take it away.
All right, hi everybody. Thank you for being here. I'm Emily Fishbaine. I'll be moderating today with our lovely panel. And I think, we have a lot of exciting stuff to cover in the next 30 or so minutes, so let's just jump right in. And I'd love to hear each of you introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit about what you're working on. Eileen?
Hi everyone. Hi everyone. I'm Eileen. I am a senior product manager at eBay right now, where I work on AI-assisted curation of user-listed items in the marketplace. And my background is in enterprise product management. Before eBay, I worked at Mozilla and at Twitter, and really, really excited to be here.
Thank you. Alan?
Hi everyone, my name is Alan. My background is also in product management. Previously, I was VP of product at Globant, which is a no-code web application builder based here in New York. I joined when they were small, just 15 people as the first PM for a set of product, and then I left mid last year as VP product when there were 150 people, so it was a very fun ride and got to wear a lot of different hats. But I left to start my own startup. So Liminary is in the AI productivity space. We are building a tool that we call the Knowledge Companion for Work. So it's a tool where you can easily save all the knowledge that's useful to you in one central place. And then Liminary will draw on the knowledge and get to know you better as a person and what work you do and what tasks you need to do to help you do your work more efficiently.
Awesome.
Hi everyone, I'm Andrea. I am the other co-founder of Koi Studios. I won't give you the spiel about Koi because Ani just did that. But prior to starting Koi, I was working as an in-house designer for some larger companies like Ticketmaster and Foursquare. And since starting Koi, I have worked with a bunch of startups from really early stage to around Series A funding to help them build AI products that people will actually use and they're easy to use. So I'm really excited to share what I've learned with you guys today.
Awesome, thank you guys. So we have a couple of three really diverse perspectives in terms of products, which I love. So let's get right into it and I'd love to ask, what makes an AI product stick or flop in your experience?
I can start. So I think the most successful AI products just solve real recurring problems that people actually have. And I feel like that answer seems really obvious, but I think over the last couple of years, a lot of companies rush to put out AI solutions in their suite without really validating the user problems behind those or even the need for AI in that, and that being the right solution. And that results in a lot of low engagement and retention. So I think like a successful product solves something specific and something useful, and it doesn't really have to be huge, right? I think a lot of people look at ChatGPT and wonder how they can get there, but not everyone's going to be the next ChatGPT. I think it's better to really start small and solve a problem really well, and then kind of expand from there.
Yeah, absolutely. Big plus one to that. The way we've been thinking about it at Liminary is, first off, does it actually solve a problem, like a real problem that people have, a real pain point? The second factor for us is that problem that you're solving valuable to people? Does the solution outweigh the costs, right? It could be financial costs, it could be the time cost it takes to use the product, like you need to iterate with AI or whatnot. And then the third thing for us, this is maybe the switches one, but we really believe in it, is how does the product make you feel as a user, and do you actually enjoy using it? And we don't think that factor can outweigh the first two factors, but, especially if you're building a more B2C product, like we are, it's important, like how your tool makes people feel is important. And we think it helps boost retention in the long run. It gets people to be stickier, it gets people like more bought into the community and the brand and whatnot. So we kind of think about those three factors.
That's great, thanks, Eileen.
I love that you mentioned cost and how it feels. So I want to bring up the example in enterprise product, which the cost is something that I think about all the time. For example, working at a company that is 30 years old, a lot of times the problems I want to solve, someone at the company has probably already started some sort of user research on it, but I just didn't know about it. And the cost of me digging through Slack files and prior user research, all of that could take 4 or 5 hours. That's the cost of my time. And it makes me feel completely overwhelmed. But because I think something that really stuck with me that did transform my product management is using like an internal GPT where the GPT gathers all the research, so I could actually be spending time digging into the specific research that I want to dig into, which is more of now I'm spending an hour in in-depth analysis rather than just putting together a lot of research. So yeah, like looking to lower costs and making me feel like I'm not overwhelmed, I think those are really big considerations for what we say.
That's great, and I love that as a segue. I think we've touched on a couple of different things, making sure that the product is meaningful and actually addressing a real problem, saving costs, and making a real impact. And then you started getting into an actual use case. I'm curious if you each can talk about some specific areas where you think AI really shines, what it can really achieve. And then thank you for that segue.
Yeah, sure. So, for all the hype around AI, I think really there are maybe some underlying characteristics of problems that AI is good at solving today. So, and I don't think it's like a great thorough taxonomy of this, but like one of the more obvious factors is it is a task where you can bear some amount of fuzziness in the output. And like the output is not the kind where it's like 100% critical to get it exactly right every time, right? Like that's obviously a great place to try AI. So, an example from my last company, the Bubble, we had built, the company had built a tool to help you build fairly complex web applications without needing to know how to code. So the whole way the product worked is that there were a ton of building blocks that we gave users, and users could then piece them together in different ways to build a working web application, all without code, which is very cool, except one of the challenges was that there was a huge learning curve at the beginning, right? Easier to learn than code, but definitely still took time. So it was pretty direct for us that like, okay, the first AI feature we should try is one that takes a description of a product from a user and then just builds the first MVP for them, right? And everything about the flow kind of like still kind of showed or portrayed a little bit like the magic going on, but also very clear building like a V1 or building like an MVP, right? So it's not end all be all. You can take this and run with it, you can be iterating on it, yada yada. But obviously like that bought us a lot of wiggle room in terms of the fuzziness that we could have in the output.
Yeah, I'm going to take a little bit of a meta approach to this question and say that I think the climate tech industry is really primed for some investment in building in AI right now. I've been to a lot of events over Tech Week and over the years, and it seems like it's becoming a really big trend. We have a lot of clients growing in that space. But AI has like a really harsh impact on the environment, on climate change, on the power grid, just from its computing power and the amount of water that it uses. But it also has the potential to really speed up solutions for the climate or slow down climate change. And so if you're thinking about something to build, I would think in that space because the world really needs that right now.
I I love that. That's fascinating. That happens to be an area that I'm looking to shift into. But do you have specific examples of the way in which AI can? Are you talking about just the speed with which solutions can be arrived at? Or can you give a little more detail about how AI can be used in that climate space?
Yeah, so I think I went to an event last year where they were using AI to actually help generate. So a lot of power grids, right? They use a lot of water because they need to cool down. And so they're using gallons and gallons of water, right? And AI uses about, I believe it's like 10 times the amount of water as a normal Google search. So I went to an event last year where they were using AI, and don't quote me on specifics, but they were using AI to help actually generate water out of these power grids, which I thought was really, really interesting. Another way that they were doing, another company was creating, using AI to be able to take really high quality images of the earth. And so that they could see specifically where there was like deforestation happening, right? And that's not something that we could have done before. So we weren't able to really see that in the quality and at the speed that we're able to see it now. So those are like really out of the box solutions using AI. Like AI, a lot of people just think, ChatGPT and chatbots, but there are really, really creative and huge solutions out there that you can explore beyond just 2D interface.
That's fascinating. The idea of creating something circular is really meaningful. I know there are a lot of critiques of AI because of its climate impact, so it's really cool that you can kind of stitch that together into a full circle moment. And it's also a good segue. I'm curious if you have other favorite examples of successful AI-enabled or AI-driven products, / who are you looking to as leaders in the AI space right now?
I can start again. So I think tying back to my answer before, you don't have to start really big, but you have to solve a problem really well. I think Jasper is a really good example of that. So Jasper is an AI writing assistant. And it's not really like groundbreaking technology. I think a lot of what you can do with Jasper, you can do with ChatGPT or any other AI-powered chatbot. But what Jasper does really well is they design for a very specific use case for content creators and marketers. And they got really good at solving that use case through a really intuitive interface, a really easy to use product. And because of that, they were successful.
Yeah, I thought there was something very key in what you just said, which is in describing Jasper, right? It's almost like the AI part of it is not the core thing we focus on that makes it a good product. Obviously, this is a lot of everything else about the product, and I very much believe that as well. So some of the AI tools that I really like right now, in terms of the meeting bot segment, there's Granola and there's Grain. Grain is a meeting bot tool that's more geared towards user research specifically. And again, both of these products have a lot of just like plain non-AI kind of productivity features in them. And that's how they kind of work users really well and seamlessly into your workflows. And then they have a dose of AI magic where it actually counts and is impactful. In a very different space, my background has been kind of building workflow builders, so kind of like Bubble. There's a tool kind of in that space called Relay, which I really like. It's basically almost like a Zapier, except there are more building blocks you have that are kind of AI powered. And it just offers a lot of like flexibility because it's fairly simple to use and to piece everything together, so things like that. And Cursor. I think honestly of all the tools I've tried, Cursor might have given me the most wow, this is magical moments. Sometimes it is totally wrong and that's very frustrating, but there are times when it's like exactly right. And this thing that would take me like an hour to code, like legitimately took like 30 seconds. So that's very powerful.
Isn't the same tooling space? Personally, I've been using Lovable a lot for AI prototyping. I think that for me, it really changes the game in telling the story of why your product is valuable. Of course, I can write a 20-page product requirements document for trying to sell my stakeholders or why I want to build something. But now instead of doing that, I'll write like a one-pager and then I'll attach a prototype, or this is the kind of value that I think it would bring to the customers, and I find that the prototype actually generates a lot more excitement and upfront, and gets my stakeholders like, oh, what more can we do if we fund this project? And not to say that this is replacing the role of design or like the role of engineering. No, it's simply, it is part of the product development that, I may be builder first, prototype and lovable, and then I work with the design and engineering firm, like, okay, but then there are nuances with our database and everything like that. And so it becomes like a really fast iteration tool that we use, and I find that it generates a lot more excitement rather than confusion, which is always great when you have to work with a lot of stakeholders.
I love that, like putting something tangible into people's hands so that they can really, a picture or prototype is worth a 20-page product requirements document. And I feel like I want to go back to the recording and write down all these tools that you guys are listing out so I can start diving into it. The extent of my AI-enabled work, I think, is just ours, which I couldn't live without. So, okay, I would love to move into some of the just like day-to-day product strategy work of making these things a reality. So, how do you identify product opportunities in your work or use cases that you would want to apply AI to?
Okay, I can start.
Go for it.
So because I work in a marketplace with 2 billion items, we have a lot of data. But the problem with having a lot of data is that it's often really unclean, or maybe the schema of how you define an item has evolved in the last 30 years. And so I think that a really great use case for LLM in my day-to-day has been being able to make sense of non-regular data. And what do I mean by that? So for example, I have all of these years of data and transformation of what defines an item. And today, the business, we know that Taylor Swift is coming to town, and so how do we find and highlight the most niche sellers and their items to represent what to wear to a Taylor Swift concert? Now, I think that AI is really great when your current tools still leaves a lot to be desired. If we didn't have LLM today, it would take about 4 to 5 hours for the business team to comb through all the listings, do different keyword searches, and maybe try different ways of discovering independent businesses that are selling in the marketplace. But with LLM, it's like now you can do the hard work of finding all of the items for Taylor Swift in 10 seconds, and then you do the fun part, which is the editing. Right, like this seller is cool, that item is too cowboy, not cowboy core enough. Because there's a difference there. So I think that the best use case is like really when you need a step change in the manual processes that you're doing today.
Yeah, absolutely. And honestly, I think like in this day and age, it's almost like with any idea you have or like any step along your user flow that the user does, it's almost like by default you should be asking yourself like, is this a step we should try AI with? And I think more often you'll find the answer is like, oh yeah, AI actually could make some interesting difference to a step, but then it's a question of like ROI for your development efforts, right? Because to create a high quality AI feature, like high quality in the sense that the output is high quality, is often like a non-trivial investment. But I think there's another question that you just brought up, which we ask also, which is this step that we may want to automate with AI. How human is it? It's like, to what extent is it important for a human to do this step? And that's one of our core design principles, and sounds like for you, which is we are trying very hard to kind of communicate very loudly that we are not trying to automate away humans, and we're not trying to automate away knowledge work. In fact, a lot of our thesis is that in the process of doing knowledge work, there's always this like unique human spark, right? This like human insight that you need, or human deciding like what's the spin of this argument I want to make, etc. And that's the part well, A, we don't think AI is great at that, but also B, we don't want to automate that away. We want to keep that a very human thing. So how can we have AI help with everything else around that almost, right? So that the human can spend more time focusing on that uniquely human part.
I just want to ask a quick follow-up, and this is for anybody, but just to drill down, you were saying going through a flow, a user flow, you should ask yourself at any step, could AI be helpful here? What are some of the attributes that you're using or metrics that you're using to evaluate whether that step in the flow is something that could be a good use case for AI for anybody?
Yeah, I want to reemphasize something I said earlier. I think you start with the problem and not the technology. So instead of asking yourself, like, what can I build with AI, you ask yourself, what problem is my user really facing? And then is AI the right solution for that? And I think that part is tricky because you can identify a lot of solutions that, problems that could be potential areas to build in, but to Eileen's point, the ROI and the key metrics that your customers care about is where the biggest problems kind of are. And I think it really honestly comes down to money, right? Things that cost them money, things that are going to make them money, or things that are going to save them money. One thing that I will note is that through working with a lot of AI products, I noticed that a lot of people put the metric of time savings. And I would say that unless the time savings are really, really significant, it's a hard metric to sell on its own. Unless you are able to really connect that time savings to money, people don't really like to invest or buy in it. So I'll give you guys an example. We were working with a startup who was in the content generation in a space where the users were a little bit less tech savvy. And the perceived value of that tool was really low because they were like, well, I can write this piece of content in 15 minutes, and with AI, I can write it in 10. It's not that big of a difference, right? So then it becomes really hard to sell to that business and to its users to actually use that tool, unless you can tie it to something a little bit more concrete than time.
That's great. Okay, so we're a little iffy on the benefit of time saving. Are there other, so cost savings are clearly a strong motivator. Are there specific types of tasks that you feel like AI excels at and that you can do you have a rule of thumb that you use when you're looking at, is this a good candidate for an AI feature? Or are you approaching it more the way that Andrea is approaching it, thinking like, AI is one tool among many that I can use to solve X problem?
I think, so I guess from my day-to-day, I would say that there are certain tasks we always reserve for the human to do, which is when there is a cultural sensitivity to what we're trying to do. Certain tasks like, okay, great, if this is about something that's, we're literally just trying to be able to focus on the right data, great for AI. If we're trying to not have to write a bunch of SQL queries, great for AI. But then if we're trying to highlight a trend that is maybe something more, it's harder for the AI to know about. For example, how, Globant was talking about the clothes that are sheer, so something like billowy clothes and ballerina and chiffon. But then when we try to curate like a collection that is sheer, we got a lot of lacy underwear. so it's like, okay, this AI did not do really well because this is like a cultural pass, right? You're trying to really get the secret sauce for this billowy romantic clothing. So I think the success metrics for AI is like, okay, efficiency and accuracy there, but then like the success metric for the human element is like, do is your taste of curating this collection really getting the engagement that we need of this collection when the trend is still high? Like, can you kind of push out this collection when the trend is still relevant? Is the CTR really high? Are we selling a lot? Are we getting a lot of clicks, but no sales? And that's really where the human secret sauce is really valuable.
Or like you said, the distinction between cowboy and cowboy core.
Right. It's like, do you want to be like Beyonce cowboy core cool, or do you kind of want to look more like Westworld or something? Yeah, it's like there are different kinds of cowboy, and there's Beyonce cool, and then there's not Beyonce cool. So. AI is
not so adept at those nuances.
Exactly.
That'll be our takeaway. That's our highlighted quote in the media marketing. So we've talked a little bit about this, and I love that it's come up organically, but what does user-centered thinking mean for AI products? If you could talk a little bit more about that, maybe dive into your process a little bit. Anybody?
Yeah, I'll take this one. So when you think about AI, I think that the first emotion that comes to mind for people isn't really excitement, but it's a lot of like mistrust and fear and confusion. And I don't think that's really surprising, by the way. I think like that is true with every new wave of technology. We saw it with like personal computers in the 70s and internet in the 90s. But I think it's been made a little bit worse by what I said earlier, this kind of huge influx of products that really were over-promising and under-delivering, which added to that skepticism. So people just don't trust AI. They don't feel like they understand it or get it, and they don't feel confident that it can actually help them in their day-to-day life. So I think that's where user-centered design and thinking come in. The most powerful or successful products aren't necessarily the ones that are like the most technologically advanced, but they're the ones that are easy to use, that are intuitive, and that can communicate their value really well. So when we design AI products, there are 4 principles that really come to mind. There's guidance and education, so helping users understand the AI itself in the system, especially in industries where, like consumer or industries where people are a little bit less tech savvy. There's trust, designing for trust, designing for control, so allowing users to really have control over the ultimate output. And there's personalization, so tailoring the experience to the user over time and learning from that. And I think the more like people understand the why and the how, the more they trust it, and then the more they trust it and the more they feel in control, the more likely they are to stick with it.
Yeah, that framework was very spot on, I think. I will also reinforce that we're living through what feels like kind of a weird time because AI is so overhyped. That's my opinion, but like AI seems very, very overhyped. And I think a lot of people, especially not in the tech industry, they're suspicious of AI, and it's not even because they think or they're afraid that AI is going to like automate away their job or anything. Like, I'm sure some people feel that way, but I think most people honestly just feel kind of gaslit by AI. It's like they see all these like wild claims of what AI can do, and then they go to ChatGPT and they try, some simple query, and what they get back is kind of underwhelming, right? It's like everybody's typing that AI will save you like 90% of the time you need to do this task, but in reality it's probably saving more like 25, 50%, just given how much you might have to like iterate or prompt engineer a little bit. So I think honestly, for us, one of the markets we're targeting with Liminary is think tanks and think tank researchers. And when we talk to them, it's like this kind of like interesting emotional dance that people go through, because on the one hand, they kind of know it's the future, they want to engage with AI, they want to see what AI can do for them, but also they're trying ChatGPT like almost every day, and they're pretty universally underwhelmed by ChatGPT. So I think it's an interesting time we're living in with that phenomenon. I don't think the tech industry is doing themselves many favors with that. But then the other thing I wanted to bring up, and not to scoop a later question, but for us, we also think about how privacy factors into being very human-centric or user-centric in design. And again, here I think there's kind of an interesting phenomenon happening where like privacy doesn't just mean kind of like, you know, like GDPR type privacy, you know, like are we treating your data well? But there are kind of interesting privacy questions being brought up by interface design at times. And I think the best example of this for me is Granola, right? People have used Granola as like a meeting bot app, but kind of a shtick that they have, or their unique point, is that it's a bot that doesn't join the meeting. It's a bot that just runs on your computer. Like it runs on my computer and it's recording the meeting as it's happening. And the other people in the meeting have no idea that I'm doing this, right? That's kind of fascinating as a move. I think it was kind of risky for them to do, but I think it's actually worked out for them, and they're definitely finding traction. It's also kind of unclear, like what are the exact privacy rules this kind of violates. And you can kind of tell they're being aware of it. They tell you like, oh, make sure that people in the meeting know you're using Granola. Like nobody's ever holding Granola. Everybody's using it. So it's like these kind of interesting questions, and like Granola happened to take a risk and mostly get away with it. It seems like it shouldn't make sense so bad, but you know, it's kind of like interesting how interface choices are hitting on some of these privacy questions as well.
I actually think that communicating exactly what is happening, like what is this product doing, like what is the AI doing, of those, even if you're saying, okay, here is what we're doing behind the scenes, that I think that would build a lot more trust, and where a lot of acts to Andrea's point, like is kind of building a lot of mistrust because you have no idea what's going on behind the scenes. And I guess like my favorite AI products are always telling me, okay, this is the data that I'm using, this is how I'm using it, and this is what I'm doing right now. And it shouldn't be on the user that, oh, I'm not technical enough or I'm using it wrong. It shouldn't make you feel like you're doing something incompatible. It shouldn't feel like you are talking like this and then the AI is talking like the other way. So I really think that a user-centered product should give constant feedback for what it's doing and how it is incorporating your human judgment to create an output that is more aligned with the user's expectation. Because so much times like okay, ChatGPT generated this, but this is not what I want. Why is it doing this? You have no idea. And I think that really fuels a lot of the mistrust and fear that Al and Andrea have been talking about.
I think another sort of fun example of that is like when the reasoning models first came out, and then the companies kind of wisely made the design choice to kind of like show you the steps the reasoning model is taking. But like, I've never actually read the steps the model is taking, right? So just like seeing that, oh, it's like ticking down a little to-do list, like makes me feel better. And I think that was a very wise choice that they made.
This is fascinating, and I feel like we've kind of, in an ad hoc way, come up with a nice list of AI heuristics that we can refer back to, you know, just considerations to keep in mind. I think we are up against the clock, so do you have any last points you want to make before we turn over to Q&A? All right, I think we'd love to open it up for questions from the audience. Do we have any questions? Yes.
Hi, thank you guys so much for doing it. Oh, okay, I can, okay. Thank you guys so much for taking the time. I'm curious, maybe to the point on prototyping being easier, I think it's like the diversity in what user experiences we come up with, what design we come up with seems to reduce. There's a lot of conversation around taste being the way that you actually then create a unique user experience. I'm just curious if you have any comments or reflections on that and how you actually achieve that.
Yeah, I can take a stab at it. So if I understand your question correctly, I'm going to try my best and tell me if I'm not hitting the mark, but I think a lot of designers get a little scared of giving tools like Lovable and Galileo to product managers, because then it's like sometimes it can be a little frustrating as a designer when your product manager creates design and they're like, look, like I made this, it's so easy, right? No, I don't mean you, of course. But I think it becomes a role for design to become a lot more strategic in that sense. One of the things that we're always kind of educating our clients on is the value of design and design thinking beyond just prototyping. So I think you kind of have to start moving away from the nitty-gritty details so much and start thinking from a more strategic standpoint. With that being said, I think tools like Lovable and stuff are really not perfect. And I actually don't think many product managers actually believe that they can do the job of a designer just as well as a designer can do it. But I think you can use prototypes and wireframes as a starting point for discussion to kind of get to the granularity of the product requirements faster, and use it as a tool to just start there, knowing that you still need a designer to be able to look at that and tell you whether it's meeting your users' needs, whether that solution is actually the best solution, or whether you can push the boundaries, right? AI is built off of training data, so it's not going to come up with the most imaginative solutions, and I think that's where designers really shine.
Actually, I also want to add to that, because I would say that, for example, when I build those prototypes on Lovable, one of the great things that actually does happen is we identify things that we do not want. And I think that it's actually really important to, yes, great, this is a requirement, this is the user job to be done, right? But then when you actually see something, you're like, this is an anti-pattern that we do not want. And I think it's just as important when you're thinking about what makes a user-centered product, what do you want to bring versus where's the anti-goal, right? And the prototype could make it really clear, and it has, because we built the prototype. But I think sometimes it's actually really hard to articulate what does not work until you see the prototype in front of you. So I think there's actually, to your point, it is imperfect, but sometimes it's a starting point. It can really help you think through a lot of the decisions up front.
Awesome, thank you. Do we have any other questions? Don't be shy. Really? Go for it. Okay.
So that didn't answer my question, but I actually have kind of a related question. So if I one day I just went and looked at all the UI of some of the main AI products, and they were either white and gray, like minimalist, ChatGPT Notion, or orange in some capacity. And so I am actually curious, as maybe I'll ask a question to you as a designer, how do you still find space to be creative and kind of rethink how people should be constructing these AI experiences, because it actually looks like everything is some version of the same?
Yeah. So I'll answer that from a UX perspective and then from a UI perspective. So I think from a UX perspective, I think design has somewhat fallen into that pattern of, do what's familiar, because you don't want to reinvent the wheel. Users are familiar with certain ways of doing things, and that's what makes it intuitive. I think with AI, that becomes a little less true, and you have a little bit more room to kind of define the standard and push the boundaries of design, because we're designing for things that didn't really exist before, right? Before, you have user flows and kind of edge cases that are really easily defined, whereas with AI, it's pretty unpredictable. So you have to, instead of designing for exact user flows, you have to make your design patterns a lot more scalable and flexible. So I'd say that from a UX perspective. I think from a UI perspective, trends are always gonna, be trendy, right? And before minimalism, there was, what's that thing called where they make buttons look like real buttons? Two more wisdom, thank you. Yeah, so there was that, and then before that, there was something else, right? And so a majority of products are going to follow that pattern, but I think what we've been talking a lot about at Koi is expressive design. That's becoming kind of the new thing, right? And so you see leaders like Airbnb and Google kind of pushing that. But that's been going on for outside of that, and I think that's a really good opportunity for designers to have a little bit of fun with what they're doing. But you can look for inspiration even just beyond like, you know, your typical design, right? Like spend some time painting, spend some time out in the world and find your inspiration there.
Yeah, so taste is like a buzzword going on right now, right? Maybe this is slightly counter to what people think with taste, but like the way I kind of think of taste is that taste applies to lots of different choices you can make in a product, and there are probably some types of choices in designing a product in general where actually using an LLM is probably going to get you a totally fine answer taste-wise, right? It might be things where there are just much more standardized approaches to something. Like it's those kinds of features where you might be tempted to try to recreate the wheel, but really like how many different UXs are there for notification centers in your product, right? Like something like that. So for those kinds of products, like even a PM using Lovable, right, is probably going to come up with like a fine answer in certain dimensions. But there are other dimensions of taste. Definitely, you know, visual design, but probably others. Maybe like content design and things like that, where there is more room to take a risk. There is more room for somebody who knows what they're doing to provide like a cohesive, different proposal that might work, right? And like those are the places where like AI is not going to get you what you want, right? And like if you ever use like my experience at least is the thing it produces is like shrug. You know, it's like fun. A lot of places it's like fun. It doesn't look great, at least when I do it. Well, like the UX choices, I'm like, these are fun. And so if that's not the dimension that you want your product to stand out, then maybe you're okay with it. But I think it really leaves room, when you're talking about taste, it really leaves room for these more risk-taking companies to try to differentiate themselves.
Hey everyone, my name is Ola, product manager at Mastercard. Thank you guys so much for taking out the time today, really insightful. The question is, the topic of metrics was brought up about time series metrics and being guided by the expectations and performance of AI. From your vantage point, what are some good metrics to track a successful AI product? Is it time series the only metrics, or are there other metrics that one can look at to say, okay, this is a phenomenal AI product, this is not so phenomenal AI product? Or something like that. Thank you.
I think this is a hard question. Basically, time saving is it's interesting that's something I'm looking up because like in numerous of my past jobs, that was like our white whale metric, right? It was like like I worked on Google Docs for example, and like there's a period of time where we're like, yes, the key metric we should be measuring is how long it takes somebody to complete their document and how much time did they save using Google Docs. That's like my conclusion is that's like a nearly impossible thing to measure. Because like, how do you know when it's done? How do you know the counterfactual? Like yada, right? Like building a bubble app, right? It's like, I don't know how long this would take you specifically, right? I think there are other domains where time savings definitely works very well, but there are like various domains where it's extremely hard to measure, I think. But to answer your question a little more seriously, like I think this is maybe part of product management almost, where it's like, how do you find a good metric to measure success in a broad sense for this particular feature?
Ultimately, it really depends on what is your objective. If your objective today is to find all the similar items, and then maybe there can be a quantitative one. Perhaps you have a set of human judgment. Like I always want to rank these 3 attributes first, what percentage of all the items that this model ran through did meet the 3 ranking criteria that I said. You know, so I think it really depends on the objective, but objective today is like, you want to, you are trying to find complementary items that can be sold together, and the objective is more about purchasing sell-through rate, then maybe it's about what percentage of items that are bought were bought with the complementing items that we recommended. So I think there's like, it really depends on the objective that you have, and then, or if it's about trust and safety, for example. After we rolled out this model, how many complaints did we get? You know, so it really depends on what you're trying to go for, and depending on, but I think what we need to align on always is, are the metrics closely aligned to how we are designing the AI? You know, if it's not aligned, if I'm trying to look at rankings, or is the model that is used the right one for the metrics that we are trying to drive? So, but usually I would say that the AI metrics, they're kind of like lower funnel metrics for me when thinking about how I ladder up to the company objective. So I would say it really depends on what you're trying to work towards.
We'll take one last question. Let's do it about you.
Thank you. What if you use AI to hack AI? The question is like, when you're a founder and you're stuck for resource, and for example, I do this now, I use a synthetic client profile, and I keep changing the vertical to see if my product will apply to that. And some of your thoughts would be interesting on that subject, where you use AI to hack AI itself. Especially when you think of it as a small, I mean, enterprise level, you do have the luxury of going and seeing where it will stick with the customer, but if you're a startup and scaling, you don't have that.
Yeah, so I can try. I think, so at Koi, right, we're a 2-person full-time studio with a lot of great contractors. But that means that we're doing everything from finance to business development to marketing. One of the things that we did recently that we thought was really cool was we automated our content generation using Mink. So we set up a series with Airtable and ChatGPT to make derivative content. So you're, generating text from audio, or you're generating a blog post from LinkedIn posts, or vice versa. That was a real time saver for us because we have been spinning our wheels trying to write content as non-content writers or creators. And it has, I know I said time savings is not a good metric, but it saved us a lot of time. More importantly, it's helped us grow our newsletter and our inbound marketing efforts. So, yeah.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. The question is about kind of like basically synthetic data training sets.
Not really. I mean, the other day I used Replit and with a platform and said, gave a URL and I said, find me the three most closest competitors to this. And then I used that. So I used AI to hack AI to hack AI. And I said, now identify the 3 customer profiles of my nearest competitors.
Yeah.
I mean, if I had to do it in the real world, it would cost me a lot and take me about at least 2 weeks to get going.
Right. I don't think I have any other secret than what you basically just did, which is try it. It's like, the great thing about social LLMs is that it's like so cheap to try something and like see what output you get. And like, part of the time that will be totally wrong. And you're like, okay, like I can think of these 2 ways to try to improve the prompt, like try that. Yeah.
I did what he did, but I got it to rate based on a criteria each site. So how well it was designed, for example.
Well, thank you so much. A round of applause, please.